Life had settled into a routine, one that I had grown to cherish over the years. My wife, Emma, and I had been married for 6 years. While it wasn't perfect, I believed we had built a solid partnership. Emma worked as a senior marketing executive at a reputable firm, a job she seemed passionate about, and I ran a small IT consultancy that kept me busy but fulfilled. Every morning, we shared the same ritual: breakfast at the table, chatting about our plans for the day. Emma would often talk about her office, her projects, and the challenges she faced at work. I'd nod, offer advice when I could, and tease her about her determination to climb the corporate ladder. One day, during breakfast, Emma mentioned something that caught my attention. "They've opened up a promotion spot for regional manager," she said, a gleam of excitement in her eyes. "I'm thinking about putting my name forward." I smiled and encouraged her. "You've been working hard for years. You deserve it. Just make sure to stay true to yourself." She laughed and gave me a peck on the cheek. "Of course, honey. I always do." Looking back, I can't help but wonder if I missed the signs in that moment. Her smile seemed more forced than usual, and her tone carried a hint of uncertainty. But I brushed it off. Emma had always been ambitious, and I wanted to believe in her integrity. At that time, I had no idea that her ambition would soon lead us down a path that would shatter everything I thought I knew about her. The promotion Emma mentioned at breakfast soon became the center of her world. Over the next few weeks, her conversations at home revolved around her plans, strategies, and how she could stand out from her colleagues. She worked longer hours, stayed up late preparing presentations, and even started taking calls from her boss, Mr. Thompson, at odd hours of the night. At first, I didn't think much of it. Mr. Thompson, from what Emma had described, was a demanding but influential man in his late 40s. She often called him a perfectionist, someone who expected his employees to go above and beyond. Emma would talk about how much she respected his work ethic, but now her admiration seemed to border on something else. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, Emma mentioned something that set off faint alarm in my mind. "Mr. Thompson told me today that he thinks I'm the top contender for the promotion," she said, her voice laced with pride. "He said he sees potential in me that others don't have." "That's great," I replied, though the way she spoke about her boss made me slightly uneasy. "Just make sure he's being fair to everyone and not putting too much pressure on you." Emma laughed nervously and brushed off my comment. "Oh, it's nothing like that. He just recognizes hard work when he sees it." But as the days turned into weeks, I noticed subtle changes in her behavior. She became more distant, spending more time at work and less time with me. Her phone, which she used to leave lying around, was now always locked or in her pocket. Whenever I asked about her day, her answers became shorter, vaguer, as if she didn't want me to know too much. One night, while I was working late in my home office, I heard Emma on the phone in the living room. Her voice was soft, almost flirtatious. "Of course, Mr. Thompson," she said. "I'll make sure everything is perfect for tomorrow's meeting. Anything else you need?" I couldn't shake the tone in her voice, but I chose to trust her. After all, this was my wife, the woman I'd promised to spend the rest of my life with. What could possibly go wrong? What I didn't know was that her ambition had already opened a door. one that her boss was more than willing to step through. Emma's obsession with securing the promotion continued to grow. One Friday evening, she came home later than usual, visibly exhausted, yet strangely energized. She mentioned that Mr. Thompson had invited her to dinner with a few senior colleagues after work to discuss strategic goals. "It's just networking," she said casually, slipping out of her heels. "You know how these things are." I wanted to believe her, but a small voice in the back of my mind urged me to question it. "Why didn't you tell me earlier? I could have picked you up." She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, it was last minute. I didn't even know about it until the end of the day." That night, as I lay awake in bed, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to her relationship with Mr. Thompson than she was letting on. But once again, I pushed my doubts aside. Emma was ambitious, yes, but she was also loyal, or so I thought. What I didn't know was that during that dinner, Mr. Thompson had shown his true colors. After a few drinks, he leaned in and said something that made Emma freeze in her seat. "You know, Emma," he began, his voice low and smooth, "this promotion isn't just about numbers or performance. It's about trust. About knowing who's willing to go the extra mile." Emma raised an eyebrow, unsure of what he meant. "I'm always willing to go above and beyond for the company, sir," she replied, trying to sound professional. He chuckled and leaned closer, his eyes glinting with something sinister. "Oh, I don't mean for the company. I mean for me. Let's just say securing this promotion might require a more personal touch." Emma's heart raced as the implication sank in. At first, she wanted to storm out and tell him off, but then she hesitated. The promotion was her dream, a chance to prove herself and finally climb the corporate ladder. Seeing her hesitation, Mr. Thompson pressed on. "Think about it, Emma. A night with me in exchange for a career-defining opportunity. It's a small price to pay, don't you think?" Emma didn't respond, but the seed had been planted. Over the next few days, she wrestled with her conscience. She justified his proposition in her mind, convincing herself that it wasn't about betrayal, but about securing a future for both of us. Eventually, she gave in. What neither Emma nor Mr. Thompson realized was that someone else in the office had been watching closely. One of her colleagues, Derek. Derek had always had a thing for Emma, and when she rejected his advances in the past, it had bruised his ego. So when he noticed her growing closeness with Mr. Thompson, he decided to dig deeper. One evening, Derek overheard a conversation between Emma and Mr. Thompson. They were planning a trip to Texas under the guise of a team-building retreat. Derek, fueled by a mix of jealousy and revenge, decided to tip me off. The call came while I was buried in work at my office. "Hello?" I answered, distracted. "You don't know me, but you need to hear this," the voice on the other end said. "Your wife, Emma, she's with Mr. Thompson right now. They've gone to Texas for the weekend, and trust me, it's not for work." I froze, the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. "Who is this? Why are you telling me this?" "Let's just say I don't like cheaters," Derek replied. "If I were you, I'd check her location right now." My hands trembled as I hung up and opened the tracking app on Emma's phone. Sure enough, her location was marked at a hotel in Texas. That was the moment I knew I had to confront her, and whatever betrayal awaited me. The drive to Texas was a blur of emotions: rage, betrayal, and a faint glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, Derek was wrong. But deep down, I knew the truth. Emma's behavior over the past few weeks, the late nights, the excuses, they all pointed to this moment. When I pulled up to the hotel, her location was still active on the app. Room 512. My chest tightened as I approached the reception desk. How can I help you? The receptionist asked with a polite smile. I need access to room 512. My wife is there, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm sorry, sir. I can't give out keys without the guest's consent, she replied. I clenched my jaw, my patience wearing thin. Then, call up and let her know her husband is here. Now. The receptionist hesitated, then picked up the phone. After a few rings, someone answered, and she handed me the receiver. Hello? It was Emma's voice, and for a brief moment, hearing her so calm and unsuspecting made my anger boil over. It's me. Open the door, I said coldly. There was silence on the other end before she stammered. What are you doing here? Open the door. Emma, now. I stormed up to room 512, my heart pounding as I reached the door. It swung open slightly, and there stood Emma, her face pale and her eyes wide with panic. Behind her, sitting on the bed, with an arrogant smirk, was Mr. Thompson. The room smelled of perfume and alcohol. Emma was dressed in a silk robe, her hair disheveled, while Mr. Thompson sat casually in a half-unbuttoned shirt. What does this all mean? I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. Emma opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Mr. Thompson cut in. Calm down, buddy. This isn't what it looks like. I stepped closer, my fists clenched. Don't you dare call me buddy. What is this, Emma? Emma's lip trembled, but again, Mr. Thompson interrupted. Look, if you can't handle the fact that your wife is ambitious, maybe you should leave. Promotions don't come easy, you know. His words hit me like a slap in the face. The arrogance in his tone, the lack of shame, it was infuriating. You think this is about a promotion? I yelled. This is about betrayal. My wife, the woman I trusted, kneeling in front of her boss like this? Before anyone could respond, two large men stepped out from the adjoining room, Mr. Thompson's bodyguards. Gentlemen, I think our guest needs to leave, Mr. Thompson said smugly. The bodyguards lunged at me, but I was ready. Fueled by anger and adrenaline, I dodged the first swing and landed a punch square on one of their jaws. He crumpled to the floor. The second one hesitated, clearly rethinking his approach. But it was too late. I grabbed him by the collar and shoved him against the wall. Mr. Thompson's smug expression vanished as he watched his so-called protection taken down in seconds. Wait, let's talk about this, he stammered, backing away. I turned to Emma, who was now crying silently, and said, You've made your choice, Emma. And now you're going to live with the consequences. As much as I wanted to lose myself in the chaos of the moment, I knew I needed to play this smart. Beating up Mr. Thompson might have been satisfying, but it wouldn't solve anything in the long run. I grabbed my phone and started recording. I panned across the room, capturing Emma's disheveled appearance, Mr. Thompson's panicked face, and the unconscious bodyguard on the floor. This is the kind of man you are, I said, directing my words at Mr. Thompson. Taking advantage of employees for your own gain? Let's see how your company's board feels about this. Mr. Thompson's face turned pale. You don't want to do that. We can work something out. Oh, I'm just getting started, I replied. Turning to Emma, I added, And as for you, don't bother coming home. You've destroyed everything. The night before I received Derek's startling call, I had no clue how deeply tangled this situation really was. Derek was one of Emma's closest office colleagues, often described by her as the Joker of the office. I'd met him a few times at corporate events, and while he seemed harmless enough, something about him always struck me as a little off. When Derek called me to expose Emma's affair, it felt out of character. Why would he, of all people, betray his coworker? As I reflected on his motives, I decided to confront him directly. The day after my confrontation with Emma and Mr. Thompson, I arranged to meet Derek at a cafe near my office. He arrived on time, a smug grin plastered on his face. "Why did you tell me about Emma and her boss?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. Derek leaned back in his chair, sipping his coffee casually. "I thought you deserved to know," he said with a shrug. "Don't give me that," I snapped. "You didn't do this out of the kindness of your heart. What's your angle, Derek? Why now?" For a moment, he looked caught off guard. But then his expression shifted to something darker, more calculated. "Fine. You want the truth? I told you. Because she turned me down." My stomach churned as his words sank in. "What are you talking about?" He smirked, leaning forward. "A few weeks ago, I made her an offer. Told her I could help her climb the corporate ladder, better than Mr. Thompson ever could. But your wife? She had the audacity to say no. Said she wasn't interested in mixing business with pleasure, even though she's doing exactly that with our boss." "You're telling me you exposed their affair out of revenge?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "Call it whatever you want," he replied. "If I can't have her, neither should he. Besides, I knew it would hit you harder than anyone else. And honestly, watching you tear their little arrangement apart was worth it." I clenched my fists under the table, resisting the urge to lunge at him. Derek wasn't just a messenger. He was a snake, slithering through the mess for his own amusement. "You're disgusting," I said, my voice steady despite the fury boiling inside me. Derek shrugged again, completely unfazed. "Say what you want, but at least now you know who your wife really is. And hey, if you ever need someone to blow up her life again, you know where to find me." Twist revelation and its impact. Derek's confession left me reeling. Emma's betrayal was bad enough, but now I had to grapple with the fact that she'd attracted attention from more than just her boss. Derek's actions added a new layer to the chaos, a web of deceit and manipulation that extended far beyond what I'd initially believed. As I left the cafe, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about Emma's choices. This was about the toxic environment she had willingly thrown herself into. An environment filled with power-hungry individuals, like Derek and Mr. Thompson. But Derek's confession also gave me an idea, a way to use his spiteful nature to my advantage. He wanted to watch Emma and Mr. Thompson's lives crumble? Fine. I'd make sure he got a front row seat. As I walked away from that cafe, my mind raced with possibilities. Derek's spiteful confession wasn't just a revelation. It was a weapon. If he wanted to watch Emma and Mr. Thompson burn, I could use that to my advantage. And the best part? I wouldn't even have to get my hands dirty. Derek would do most of the work for me. I sat down that night, piecing together my plan. Derek was driven by his ego and his wounded pride. His jealousy over Emma rejecting him made him reckless, and I knew I could exploit that recklessness to set my revenge into motion. The first step was simple: bait Derek into escalating his actions. I called him later that evening, pretending to be just as bitter and vengeful as he was. "You know," I said, my voice carefully laced with anger, "you were right about everything. Emma's not who I thought she was. Neither is that scumbag boss of hers. If they think they can humiliate me like this and get away with it, they're dead wrong." Derek chuckled on the other end of the line. "Glad to hear you're finally seeing things my way. What's the plan?" I hesitated for a moment, letting the silence build before replying. "I need evidence. Solid evidence of their affair. Not just for the divorce, but to completely ruin them. And I bet you have access to things I don't. Emails, messages, whatever." Derek's eagerness was palpable. "Oh, I have plenty of dirt on both of them," he said. "Mr. Thompson thinks he's untouchable, but he's not as careful as he should be. And Emma? She's left her trail too. If you want proof, I can get it for you." "Good," I said, keeping my tone steady. "Send me everything you've got. Let's bring them down together." Over the next few days, Derek began feeding me information. He sent me screenshots of emails between Emma and Mr. Thompson, photos from office events where they were a little too close, and even hotel receipts from their previous business trips. But I wasn't just collecting evidence for my divorce. I had bigger plans. I forwarded the most damning pieces of evidence to Mr. Thompson's wife, an intelligent and sharp woman who clearly had no idea what her husband had been up to. I didn't stop there. I also sent anonymous emails to the board of directors at their company, detailing Mr. Thompson's abuse of power and his inappropriate relationship with Emma. As for Derek, I encouraged him to spread the word among their colleagues, ensuring that whispers of the affair began circulating throughout the office. He was more than happy to oblige, relishing the chaos he was creating. Once the groundwork was laid, I moved on to the final step of my revenge. I needed to confront Emma and Mr. Thompson one last time. But this time, I wouldn't just be armed with my fury. I'd be armed with the evidence Derek had provided, and the destruction it had already caused. I let them believe they were safe for a while, watching as their lives slowly began to unravel. Mr. Thompson's wife filed for divorce, and the board of directors launched an internal investigation into his conduct. Emma's colleagues began to distance themselves from her, whispering about the rumors Derek had spread. Then, when the time was right, I showed up at their office unannounced, walking into a meeting they were both attending. I dropped a stack of printed emails and photos on the table, letting the weight of the evidence speak for itself. "Promotion's not so easy to get now, is it?" I said coldly, staring directly at Mr. Thompson. His face turned pale, and Emma's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand," she began, but I cut her off. "I understand perfectly," I said. "You were willing to destroy our marriage for this man, and now you're both paying the price." I turned to leave, but not before delivering one final blow. "Oh, and Derek sends his regards." By the time the dust settled, Mr. Thompson had lost his job and his family. Emma was left with nothing but regret and the humiliation of being exposed. As for Derek, he got exactly what he wanted: the satisfaction of seeing them fall. But the true victory was mine. I filed for divorce, using the evidence to ensure a favorable settlement. I walked away from that toxic relationship with my dignity intact, and the knowledge that neither Emma nor her boss would forget the consequences of their actions.